Hey, my name is Trish. I'm one of those babysitters that, although I'm good with kids, have a hard time interacting with other adults and making myself known as a babysitter. Luckily, I recently found out that Craigslist also offers services. It's not just a portal to buy and sell things. Using Craigslist, I got several babysitting jobs, and for the first time in my 18 years of life, I started earning money. But this little job didn't last long, as something forced me to interrupt it. At first, it seemed like a normal job with just a little quirk. A single father had hired me to babysit his son. Normally, parents wait for me to arrive before they leave so they can meet me or at least see my face, but not this one. When I arrived at the house, there was no one there, just the little boy, who came to greet me with a big hug and lots of kisses on my face. It seemed too euphoric, but at the same time, a little tender. As the afternoon progressed, everything became stranger. Although he was a big boy, about 10 years old, he needed my help with almost everything. He would ask me to help him eat, to stroke his head, to take off his clothes because the room was too warm. I was surprised that a child of that age required so much attention. Possibly that's how the father had raised him. After eating, it was time to go to sleep, but the father had written that he could eat ice cream. The child not only ate it in a disgusting and repulsive way, putting it in his mouth with his hands and dirtying everything, but to make it worse, he would put his hands with ice cream in my mouth for me to taste. If I refused, he would cry and make a lot of noise until I finally gave in. After that, I began to smell a very strange but familiar smell. That's when I realized that the boy hadn't made it to the bathroom. So not only did he make me clean his clothes, but I had to clean him as well. After that, the time finally come. He was finally going to take a bath and then go to sleep. I took off all his clothes, although for some reason he was too shy to take off his underwear, but I accepted it. In the worst case scenario, I could wash him later. During his shower, the boy asked me to soap him, to wash him, and he even threw water on my top. It was all very uncomfortable. I had never dealt with anyone like this before. It only made me wonder who was the strange man who had raised him. The only thing I knew was that I didn't want to be there when he arrived. I grabbed all of the boy's clothes and went to his room to get a towel until a smell I didn't recognize this time made me go look under the bed. When I did, I couldn't help but scream in terror. Under the bed was a corpse. It was still fresh. What could have caused this? Suddenly, a phone started ringing from the dining room, and I ran over. Maybe it was the boy's father. I had to tell him to call the police. The killer might still be nearby. I had to take the boy away as soon as possible. I ran downstairs, but the noise of the phone came from a cell phone that was under an armchair. When I bent down to grab it, I not only had the phone in my hands, but something else. It was an ID card of a man over 30 years old. I knew that face. It was the face of the child I was taking care of. That wasn't a child. That was a grown man. Suddenly, I heard a scream at the top of the stairs. It was him, looking at me while laughing with a face full of perversion and cruelty. He knew I had found out the truth. "Hey Trish, I've had my bath. Will you tell me a bedtime story?" Ha ha. In shock, I ran for the exit while he was still laughing. He never tried to chase me. He never tried to kill me. He just enjoyed seeing me terrified, crying, and trying to get away. I called the police immediately. Although they found no one, they discovered that the body belonged to a man who lived alone in the house and had no children. I never heard from that terrifying psychopath again. From that day on, I was able to overcome my fears and start working with people in my neighborhood, people I knew. Every time I think about how that man took advantage of me and made me do all the things I did, I cry. I just cry myself to sleep and forget about it. How much do you believe in urban legends? I was never a very believing person, or I wasn't until that day. The day that something forced me to put all my beliefs into play and see that there is something else that we don't see. That day I had to take care of my neighbor's children, and and although they were very problematic, I had already taken care of them many times, and they had known me all my life. So I was basically the only person who could control them. Still, it didn't stop them from misbehaving, but that day they promised to be quiet in exchange for trying out a toy they found in their parents' closet, an Ouija board. When the time came, we followed all the rules, lit the candles, and turned off all the lights. The game began. I knew this was very irresponsible. The kids were no older than 12 years old, but if they didn't do it with me, they would do it on their own. And I must admit that I was a little excited too. We started the game, and as I expected, nothing was happening. We asked simple questions, to which the board did not respond. The kids started to get bored, until to motivate them, I moved my hand to play a joke on them. I moved my fingers from one place to another to answer the questions. They were excited, but from 1 second to the next, everything took a darker turn. I suggested to the children to say goodbye to the ghost to end the game. But when my fingers moved to the goodbye part of the board, they moved to the no part instead. Suddenly, my hand kept moving. But this time, I wasn't controlling it. All the letters formed insults and threats. I got mad at the kids for moving the board like that, but when I saw them, they were crying in terror. This was no joke. Besides, it wasn't the board that was moving, it was my hand. A rule says we can't leave the game without saying goodbye to the ghost, so we had no choice but to keep playing. Angry, but scared, I demanded the ghost to let us go. At first, the board did not move, but within seconds, it responded differently. The house was freezing, and the candle fires had grown, but all around us, the darkness was more noticeable than before, as if there was a black hole surrounded by beings that wanted to harm us. The children were terrified. They were still playing, not because they didn't want to break the rules, but because fear had paralyzed them. Suddenly, a lit candle flew in my direction. I could barely dodge it, and when it hit the floor, about 2 meters away from us, it illuminated the face of a horrifying being that was staring at us. Immediately after, the candle went out, and so did all the candles we had near us. In total darkness, we began to hear footsteps near us. Something stood behind me and began to breathe on the back of my neck, closer and closer and closer and closer. At our worst moment, a flash of light invaded the house and the lights came on. It was the parents of the children, who as soon as they came in and saw what was happening, kicked the Ouija table and pushed the 2 children away from the room. Shortly after the children fell asleep, they told me what was happening. The Ouija board had not attracted any ghosts in the house. Those ghosts were already there. They bought the Ouija board so they could contact them and ask them to leave, but they didn't succeed. Those kids suffer paranormal events every day, and that's why they were so curious to play, to solve the problem for us. I never entered that house again. That night had marked the end of my days as a babysitter. Who knows what is to be found in every house I go to visit, and who knows if it may not follow me. Hey guys, my name is Cynthia, and I am the best babysitter in my town. I know it's not much to say, but I'm really proud. I love children, and I'm finishing my studies to become a kindergarten teacher. As I am in my last year, I was considering quitting babysitting and dedicating myself completely to studying, but on the weekends I wanted to continue working to help my parents. It was in one of these weekend jobs that I had the worst experience of my life. The experience that made me stop being a babysitter or going into other people's houses for years. It all started when I got a call from some new clients. They were an elderly couple who had to take care of their grandson, a little boy who had lost his parents. The grandparents had no problem taking care of them, but for once, they wanted to take a break to watch a movie at home. The job seemed easy, and I didn't want to miss the opportunity to help the grandparents, so I headed to their house the next day without hesitation. When I arrived, I was shocked. The house was huge. It looked like a mansion. The grandparents treated me very well, but there was something that caught my attention. They kept looking at me. Their eyes were frozen on me. But one of the things that accentuated their terrifying looks was that they were always smiling. But not like grandparents would smile. They had an ear-to-ear grin that exposed their teeth, which looked surprisingly well-groomed and sharp. When I entered the boys' room, the nightmare began. The grandparents locked the doors and the child. That was no child. It was a huge, overweight adult wearing a diaper and a rattle. "Are you my new toy?" Innocent but terrifying voice. His words went through my whole body in the form of a painful shiver. My first reaction was to try to escape, to bang on the door as hard as I could, but no one was coming for me. This was a trap. "Do you want to have a tea party?" I decided to play along. This man didn't look like a psycho or inherently evil. He looked like an adult with a mental problem. Mem. It's very tasty. Pretending to eat a plastic cake. Are you kidding me? You're not eating. You're just pretending. No, I'm eating. Before I could finish, the man jumped at me with a piece of plastic cake and tried to put it in my mouth. Swallow, swallow, swallow. At that moment, I thought my life was over. The man was sticking his fingers down my throat, forcing me to swallow the plastic, but it wouldn't go in. Meanwhile, I was choking. I could no longer breathe. In panic, I managed to kick him, and in desperation, I jumped out of the window regardless of the fact that it was a second floor. When I fell to the ground, I realized that I had broken my arm, but I stood up anyway to keep running. The door of the old people's house opened, and angrily, the grandmother ran out with a knife. We both ran, but even though it was just a lady, she was catching up with me. The fall also hurt my foot, which was hurting more and more. When the lady was behind me, ready to attack me, a hand stopped her. They were my neighbors. All of them had gathered to defend me, and all of them knew me as their children's babysitter. They all loved me as their own daughter, and that day, they saved my life. Soon after, I saw on TV how they arrested the old couple. They were two dangerous fugitives, and the man in diapers was a child who had been kidnapped as a child and raised to kill babysitters just for the amusement of the elderly. Fortunately, he is now in better hands, in a center where he can be cared for. From time to time, I go to visit him. Nowadays, he considers me as his big sister. As for the elderly, they are in prison, and because of their age, they will never get out.